Germany, 1936. Karl Weiss was only 15 years old when the world began telling him who he was supposed to be. He was born in a small industrial town where factories smoked day and night, where bread was never enough, and where memories of the last war still haunted every household. His father had returned from World War I broken, not missing limbs, but missing belief. He rarely spoke, and when he did, it was only to warn, war takes more than it gives. But Germany was changing. Banners hung from buildings. Drums echoed through streets. Men in sharp uniforms spoke with confidence about pride, strength, and destiny. And boys like Karl listened. At school, teachers no longer taught just history. They taught purpose. They said Germany had been humiliated. They said enemies were everywhere. They said young men like Karl were needed to restore honor. When the Hitler Youth Recruiter came, Karl stood straighter than ever before, not because he hated anyone, not because he loved violence, but because he wanted to belong. The first uniform. The day Karl received his first uniform, his mother cried silently in the kitchen. It was too big for him, sleeves hanging past his wrists, but he wore it with pride. In the mirror, he didn't see a boy anymore. He saw importance. Marching felt powerful. Singing felt unifying. Obedience felt like strength. No one talked about death. No one talked about regret. They talked about honor. When ideas replace thought. By 1939, Karl was 17. The war began like a parade. Crowds cheered as soldiers boarded trains. Flowers were thrown. Music played. Karl stood at the station, the same one shown in the picture, watching older boys leave for the front. Something inside him burned. Why not me? His father said nothing. His mother hugged him too tightly. Months later, the letter arrived. SS recruitment program. Accepted. Karl didn't understand the difference between SS and Army. He only understood one thing. He had been chosen. The first lesson Karl Weiss learned in SS training was simple. Thinking was dangerous. The camp was surrounded by barbed wire and pine forest. Isolated from the world. Cut off from families, letters, and memories of who they once were. Every day began before sunrise. Whistles screamed. Boots hit frozen ground. Names disappeared, replaced by numbers. Karl became Recruit 317. Sleep was a privilege. Pain was a tool. Fear was currency. The instructors did not shout to motivate. They shouted to erase, breaking the boy. They made the boys run until lungs burned and legs failed. When one collapsed, everyone was punished. If one is weak, the instructor roared, all are weak. Karl learned quickly, survive by not standing out. During rifle drills, they were forced to aim at human-shaped targets, not enemies, not soldiers, human silhouettes. Do not see faces, the officer barked. Faces make you hesitate. Karl's hands shook the first time he pulled the trigger. No one noticed, because no one was allowed to notice. Words as weapons. At night, lectures replaced rest. They spoke of purity, of threats, of enemies who did not deserve mercy. Slides showed distorted images. Stories were repeated until they felt like truth. Karl wanted to believe. Belief was easier than doubt. But sometimes, when the barracks went silent, he remembered his father's words. War takes more than it gives. Those words now felt forbidden, dangerous. The first punishment. One evening, a boy named Lucas whispered during lights out, "Do you think this is right?" Karl didn't answer. The next morning, Lucas was gone. No explanation. No questions allowed. Karl never whispered again. That was the day he learned the most important rule. Silence keeps you alive. The uniform becomes heavy. Weeks turned into months. Karl's body grew stronger, but something else shrank. His empathy, his hesitation, his inner voice. He obeyed orders without looking at the targets. without thinking about consequences. That frightened him more than punishment ever had. One night, staring at his reflection in a window, he barely recognized the boy who once wanted to belong. The uniform fit now, but it felt heavier every day. The final test. At the end of training, the recruits were lined up. The commander walked slowly in front of them. "You are no longer boys," he said coldly. "You are weapons." Karl felt a chill. Weapons are not asked what they want. Weapons are used. As he boarded the transport to the front, rifle in hand, Karl realized something terrible. He had survived training, but lost something he could never reclaim: his innocence. The front did not look like the posters. There were no clean lines, no heroic music, no speeches, only mud. Karl Weiss stepped off the transport and immediately sank ankle-deep into it. The air smelled of damp earth, smoke, and something metallic he couldn't place. Men moved past him without looking, faces hollow, eyes older than their years. An NCO shoved him forward. Trench, now. The trench swallowed him. Wooden planks rotted underfoot. Rats scattered. Somewhere nearby, artillery thudded like a distant heartbeat. Karl pressed his back to the wall, rifle tight in his hands, trying to remember the words they had drilled into him. Do not think. Obey. But the sounds were too close, too real. A scream cut through the air. Short, sharp, and then nothing. Karl flinched. The veteran beside him didn't. The wait. War, Karl learned, was mostly waiting. Waiting while shells whistled overhead. Waiting while rain turned earth into glue. Waiting while fear crawled into places training could not reach. An officer paced behind them. Heads down, eyes forward. Karl peered over the parapet for the first time. The land beyond was torn open. Trees snapped like bones. Craters filled with black water. And there, half buried near the wire, lay a body. The uniform was different. The face was not. A face is a face. Karl's stomach tightened. He looked away and felt ashamed for it. Contact. The attack came without warning. A sudden roar. Ground shaking. Men shouting orders that blurred together. Karl fired because everyone else did. He aimed where he was told to aim. Shapes moved in the smoke. He squeezed the trigger. Again. Again. His ears rang. His hands burned. His mind narrowed to noise and motion. Then it was over as quickly as it began. Silence fell, thick and wrong. Cease fire. Karl lowered his rifle. His heart was trying to escape his chest. The walk forward. Advance. They climbed out of the trench. Karl's legs trembled as he stepped into the open. The ground sucked at his boots. Smoke thinned, revealing what the training had never shown him. Bodies. Some still moved. A wounded man lay on his side, gasping, reaching out with fingers slick with blood. His eyes locked onto Karl's. Not hatred, not anger, fear. Karl froze. The NCO shouted, "Keep moving." Karl moved, but the eyes followed him long after he passed. He told himself it wasn't his fault. He told himself he had done his duty. But something inside him had cracked. The aftermath. Back in the trench, men counted ammunition instead of lives. A joke drifted down the line. Nervous laughter. Someone lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Karl sat down hard, staring at his boots. Mud. Blood. Both looked the same now. A veteran leaned close. First time? Karl nodded. The man exhaled smoke. You don't get used to it. You just get quieter. That night, Karl could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the reaching hand. He had fired. He didn't know at whom. He didn't know if anyone had fallen because of him. And somehow that uncertainty was worse. The question he couldn't ask. Before dawn, Karl wiped his rifle clean. The metal gleamed. It looked innocent. He thought of his mother, of the train station, of the uniform that had promised purpose. Is this what they meant? He wondered. There was no answer, only orders waiting with the sun, and a boy who had crossed a line he could never step back over, not because of what he had done, but because of what he now knew. The village was already burning when Karl Weiss arrived. Smoke rolled low over collapsed roofs. Chickens scattered through ash. The smell of fire mixed with something sweeter. Bread still warm inside a shattered bakery. It felt wrong, like the world had been paused mid-breath and then broken. Karl's unit formed a line at the edge of the square. An officer read orders without looking up. Search, secure, no delays. The words were clean. What followed was not. Doors were kicked in. Cries echoed from inside homes. Men were dragged into the open. Some old, some barely grown. Women clutched bundles of clothes. Children clung to legs. Karl stood rigid, rifle held where training demanded. Do not think. Obey. But thinking was all he could do. The order. A second officer arrived, boots polished, voice calm. These people assisted partisans, he said. We make an example. Karl's chest tightened. Partisans. The word had been drilled into him until it meant danger, until it justified everything. But the faces in front of him were not slogans. They were human. A man was pushed to his knees. His hands shook as he tried to speak. Karl's heart hammered. The officer's gaze swept the line and stopped on Karl. You, step forward. Karl obeyed. His legs felt numb. Take position. The rifle was suddenly heavier than it had ever been. The man on his knees looked up. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the war narrowed to a single breath. The pause. Karl did not raise the rifle. Seconds stretched. The officer's voice sharpened. Do it. Karl's hands trembled. He heard training echo in his skull. He felt the eyes of his unit burning into his back. If he refused, there would be consequences. If he obeyed, he thought of his father's silence, his mother's tears, the reaching hand in the mud. I can't, he whispered. The word barely escaped his lips, but it was enough. The consequence. The officer's face hardened. Step aside. Karl was shoved back into the line. Another soldier moved forward. The rifle rose. The sound came like a door slamming shut. Karl flinched. He stared at the ground, at the ash and footprints, while the world tilted. No one spoke to him afterward. That was worse than shouting. That was judgment. The mark. Back at camp, Karl was summoned. No charge was read. No defense allowed. You hesitated, the commander said. Hesitation kills. Karl nodded. He did not argue. Punishment came quietly. Extra duties. Night watches. The cold shoulder of men who had once shared bread with him. He had been marked, not as brave, not as kind, but as unreliable. In the SS, that was the most dangerous label of all. The weight of knowing. That night, Karl scrubbed his rifle until his hands bled. He could still hear the sound. He could still see the eyes. He understood now what training had tried to erase. Once you see the line, once you feel it under your feet, you cannot pretend it isn't there, and sooner or later, the war would force him to choose again. The quiet decision. Lying on his bunk, Karl stared at the ceiling. He did not dream. He planned. Not escape, not heroism, just survival, without losing what little of himself remained. He did not know how. He only knew one truth. The uniform could command his body, but it could no longer own his conscience. From that day on, Karl Weiss was never alone. And yet, he was always isolated. No one accused him openly. No one shouted. No one reported him. They didn't need to. Silence did the work. In the barracks, conversations stopped when he entered. Cards were gathered up. Jokes ended mid-sentence. A space opened beside him on the bench like an invisible warning sign. Karl learned the new rules quickly. Speak less. Ask nothing. Volunteer for nothing. Draw no attention, because attention was dangerous. The whispers. At night, while others slept, Karl lay awake listening. Boots outside, murmured voices, a cough that sounded too deliberate. He began to notice things he had never noticed before. How often officers counted heads, how long some men were called away, how rarely they returned. The SS did not forgive doubt. It studied it. Once, during weapons inspection, an officer paused at Karl's rifle. "You clean it often," the man observed. "Yes, sir." "Afraid it will fail you?" Karl chose his words carefully. "Afraid I will fail it." The officer smiled thinly and moved on. Karl's palms were slick with sweat. Proving loyalty. The next weeks were designed to test him. Extra night patrols. Pointless errands under fire. Assignments meant to exhaust rather than succeed. It wasn't punishment. It was pressure. They wanted him to break or conform. During one patrol, a shell landed close, throwing dirt and splinters into the air. A man beside Karl screamed, clutching his leg. Karl dropped instantly, dragging him behind cover, tearing cloth to bind the wound. When it was over, a sergeant pulled Karl aside. "You're quick to help," he said, voice unreadable. Karl nodded. "Just remember who deserves it." The words lingered like smoke. The friend who disappeared. There had been one man who still spoke to Karl. Emil, older by a few years, quieter than most. They shared cigarettes when rations allowed. Said little. One morning, Emil's bunk was empty. No gear, no note, no explanation. Karl asked no one. He didn't need to. The absence spoke clearly. This is what happens. That night, Karl sat on his bunk, just like the picture, helmet at his feet, staring at the floor until the light went out. For the first time, fear was no longer about the enemy. It was about his own side. The choice narrows. Orders came faster now, shorter, colder. Karl noticed how often his name appeared on rosters that went out first and returned last. He understood the message. Prove yourself or be removed. He tried to disappear into routine. He followed commands precisely. He kept his eyes forward. He never hesitated. But inside, something resisted. Not loudly, not bravely, quietly, and that quiet resistance made him more dangerous than open defiance ever could. A private vow. One evening, alone in the barracks, Karl took out a small scrap of paper he had kept folded in his boot since training. It held his mother's handwriting, just a line from an old letter. "Stay human, no matter where you are." He read it once, then burned it. Not because he rejected it, because if it was found, it would condemn him. The ash fell through his fingers, and in that moment, Karl made a private vow. He would survive this war, not by becoming cruel, but by becoming invisible. End of the chapter. The war outside roared on. Inside, another war tightened its grip. One fought without weapons, against suspicion, isolation, and fear. Karl had been branded, not as a hero, not as a traitor, but as something far more dangerous to the system, a man who still thought for himself. The order arrived after midnight. No drums, no speeches, just a folded paper placed on the wooden table where Karl Weiss was cleaning his boots. Night clearance operation. Civilian zone. Karl's hands stopped moving. He read the line again. Then again. Civilian zone. That was the phrase everyone feared, because it meant the rules disappeared. Outside, the wind carried the smell of smoke and damp stone. Somewhere in the distance, a building collapsed with a sound like slow thunder. Karl folded the paper carefully, as if rough handling might make it worse. The march into darkness. They marched through streets that no longer felt like streets, only scars cut into the city. Windows were empty eyes. Doors hung open like broken jaws. Searchlights swept across walls, freezing shadows in place. Each step echoed too loudly, as if the city itself was watching. Karl walked near the back, always the back, not cowardice, instinct. He had learned that those who walked first were watched, and those who hesitated were remembered. The officer's words. They stopped near a half-destroyed school. The officer gathered them. "There are people hiding," he said calmly. "Information is missing. Orders are simple." He paused, letting silence do the work. Compliance. Karl felt his stomach tighten. No mention of enemy soldiers. No mention of weapons. Only people. Inside the house. The door was kicked open. A scream cut through the air. Sharp. Human. Unforgettable. Inside, a family stood frozen. A man with raised hands. A woman clutching a child. Fear pouring from them like heat. Karl's rifle came up automatically. Training took over, but his mind lagged behind. The child's eyes locked onto his. Not angry, not hateful, just confused. The moment that changed him. "Do it," the officer said behind him. Karl didn't move. 1 second. 2. That pause was enough. The officer stepped closer. Karl lowered his weapon, just slightly, enough to be noticed. "I'll handle this," Karl said, forcing steadiness into his voice. The officer stared at him, long, then turned away to search another room. Karl exhaled, barely. He whispered to the man, "Stay quiet. Don't move." The family obeyed like statues. For the first time since joining, Karl wasn't acting like a soldier. He was acting like a human being. After the raid, nothing was found. The unit left. Outside, the officer stopped Karl with a hand on his chest. "You hesitated," he said softly. "That's dangerous." Karl nodded. "I understand." But inside, something had already shattered. Realization. As they walked back through the ruined streets, Karl understood a terrible truth. This war wasn't testing his strength. It was testing how much of his soul he was willing to give up to survive. And tonight, for the first time, he had chosen not to give it all. That choice would not be forgiven forever. The system never forgot. Karl Weiss did not sleep that night. The room was dark, except for water dripping from a cracked ceiling. Each drop hit the floor with the sound of a ticking clock. Slow, patient, unforgiving. His rifle lay beside him. For the first time since training, he did not touch it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the child's face from the house. Not crying, not screaming, just staring. As if asking a question Karl had no answer for. The silence inside his head. War was loud. Explosions, orders, boots on stone. But this silence was worse. Karl realized something terrifying. The moment you stop believing in what you're doing, every action becomes heavier. Before, he followed orders because he was told to. Now, he followed orders while knowing they were wrong. That difference was destroying him. The letter he never sent. Karl pulled a folded paper from his coat. A letter to his mother. He had written it weeks ago, but never finished it. "I am safe. I am doing my duty. I am still your son." He stared at the words. Safe. A lie. Duty. A question. Son. Something he no longer recognized. His hand shook. He tore the letter slowly, piece by piece, until the words no longer existed. The next day, morning came without warmth. The unit was ordered to escort prisoners, civilians suspected of helping resistance fighters. No proof, only suspicion. Karl walked beside the line. Old men, women, a boy barely older than the child from the house. The boy stumbled. Karl instinctively reached out, then stopped. Helping was noticed. Mercy was recorded. The boy stood back up alone. That moment hurt more than any wound. The commander's test. Later that afternoon, Karl was called forward. The commander studied him like an object. "You hesitate," he said. "You question. That makes you unreliable." Karl felt his chest tighten. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Unreliable men must prove loyalty. Karl understood what that meant. He was being watched now. The order, a new task, one simple instruction. Stand guard. Do not intervene. Behind him, shots rang out. Karl stood still. His body obeyed. His mind screamed. Each shot felt like it passed through him. He realized then, even doing nothing was a choice, and that choice would haunt him forever. The crack. That night, alone again, Karl finally broke. His hands trembled uncontrollably. His breathing came fast and shallow. He pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the floor like a child. "I didn't shoot," he whispered to no one, "but I didn't stop it either." For the first time, Karl admitted the truth. The uniform was not just something he wore. It was something that was killing him from the inside. Karl Weiss had crossed a line, not by pulling a trigger, but by surviving while others didn't. From this point on, escape was no longer physical. It was moral, and the war was not done with him yet. Karl Weiss had learned one truth. Obedience could kill the soul faster than bullets. The night after the incident with the civilians, he made a quiet decision, not a heroic one, not one that could be recorded in history. Just survival, silent, careful, invisible. The plan. Karl studied routines. Who watched which gate? When patrols changed? Where supplies were stored? Every day he took mental notes. Every glance counted. Even a glance in the wrong direction could mean death. He found small vulnerabilities. A guard who slept longer than usual. A loose plank on a watchtower. A forgotten gate. And he waited. First attempt. One early dawn, Karl slipped past the barracks unnoticed. The fog swallowed his figure. Footsteps echoed faintly on cobblestones. He kept moving, breathing shallowly, listening. For a moment he imagined freedom. Then a dog barked. Shouts rose in the distance. His heart raced, but he didn't stop. He vanished into the rubble of a nearby street, hiding behind the wreckage of what was once a bakery. Hiding. Hours passed. The world felt paused. Smoke lingered. Ash floated in the early morning light. Karl crouched, watching soldiers search systematically, unaware he was steps away. His body ached. Hunger clawed at him, but he forced calm. One wrong move, and it would end. He had learned the art of invisibility. Trading information. Karl had noticed patterns. Some civilians were secretly resisting, trading food and warning each other. He approached carefully, offering minor information in exchange for guidance and sustenance. A piece of bread here, a blanket there, a whispered word on which streets to avoid. Each interaction was measured, cautious. Trust was dangerous. Even kindness could betray him. The close call. One afternoon, Karl passed a patrol returning from a raid. Their eyes swept the street like metal detectors. A boy shouted in fear. Karl froze. The soldiers passed. He exhaled slowly. The fog embraced him again. Each day of survival required courage. Not the courage of heroics, the courage of invisibility, the lesson of silence. By evening, Karl understood. To live, he must unlearn everything taught to him. Obedience, hierarchy, loyalty, all tools of control. Now, intelligence, patience, and invisibility became his weapons. The moment of reflection. Karl found a quiet corner of the ruins, alone. A child's abandoned toy lay in ash. He picked it up, holding it tightly. Reminded him of the house he saved. He whispered a vow. "I will survive, even if it means becoming nothing in their eyes." And that night, Karl Weiss disappeared into the fog, a ghost in his own war. Karl Weiss had been invisible for weeks, but war had a way of finding even the smallest shadows. A whispered warning. One evening, in a deserted alley, a whisper reached him. "Someone saw you." Karl froze. Every nerve screamed. The walls of the ruined city seemed to close in. He had survived through patience. intelligence, and silence. But now, the game had changed. The moral dilemma. The informant was a young local, frightened and hungry. They offered Karl a deal: shelter in exchange for information about other deserters. Karl's stomach twisted. This was the ultimate test. Should he trade another's life for his own? Every instinct screamed no, but survival demanded a choice. He walked away without a word, leaving the boy staring after him. Every step felt like walking on shards of glass. The close call. Days later, Karl was spotted by a patrol while scavenging for food. They shouted, rifles raised. He froze, then sprinted into a collapsed building. Breathless, covered in dust, he hid among broken beams and shattered walls. The patrol passed, cursing the wind and shadows, unaware he had been mere feet away. Karl realized living meant calculated courage. Every heartbeat, every step was a silent battle. The guilt and terror. Even in hiding, Karl could not escape the weight of what he had witnessed. The screams of civilians, the absence of friends like Emil. Every choice he made was a ghost that followed him. He wrote nothing, said nothing, but he carried it all. The war had made him a survivor, but it had stolen his innocence, and now even survival felt like betrayal. The strategic escape. Karl learned the patrol patterns by heart. He memorized every shortcut, every ruin, every shadow where he could disappear. Each day became a strategy session, each night a test of nerves. Slowly, silently, Karl carved a path through a city that sought to erase him. The moment of realization. On the 9th week of hiding, Karl paused at a ruined bridge, looking down at the river below. Water flowed steadily, unconcerned with human suffering. For the first time, Karl felt a flicker of clarity. He had survived not by courage or obedience or luck, but by refusing to surrender his conscience completely. He understood something vital. Survival in a system built on fear required moral cunning, not heroics. Karl Weiss was at the edge. Every decision, every silent movement had brought him here. But the war was not finished. The ultimate challenge, and his final moral test, was still ahead. The war had stretched Karl Weiss to his limits. Every street he had walked, every shadow he had hidden in, had brought him here, to the precipice of finality. For weeks he had survived on invisibility, wits, and careful observation. He had avoided orders that demanded cruelty. He had saved lives quietly, without recognition. He had become a ghost in a world of violence. The last order. One morning, the officer who had never forgotten Karl's hesitation approached him. "Karl," he said quietly, "we need a man to lead a small detachment. A mission, swift, efficient, critical." Karl read the file. Another civilian area. Another test. Another moral trap. For the first time, he realized he could obey and survive, but at the cost of everything human inside him. Or he could refuse, risk death, but preserve what remained of his conscience. The internal battle. Karl sat on a ruined wall, watching the sun rise over a city that had lost its soul. He remembered Emil gone, the child he had saved, staring at him, every life he had touched quietly, every decision he had made to remain human. He felt the weight of 1,000 unspoken voices, the ghosts of those he had failed and those he had spared. The uniform pressed on him like a curse, the rifle at his side, a symbol of coercion, and the street ahead, lined with potential victims and moral ruin. The escape decision. Slowly, deliberately, Karl made his choice. He would not obey blindly. He would not kill for orders, but he would survive, not by being a soldier, not by hiding forever, but by becoming something in between. Invisible, intelligent, and morally intact. the night of disappearance. At dusk, Karl left the barracks. He carried nothing but a small satchel. Bread, water, a change of clothes, and a scrap of paper with his mother's handwriting. Stay human, no matter where you are. He slipped through alleys and ruins. He avoided patrols with silent precision. He used abandoned tunnels, hidden doorways, and the cover of fog. Every heartbeat measured, every breath controlled. For the first time, he moved freely. But freedom was fragile. Every step forward was a step from death, a step from morality lost. The reconciliation with self. Karl paused on a hill overlooking the destroyed city. Ash floated in the air. Smoke lingered in the distance, and the morning sun cast long shadows over streets emptied by war. He allowed himself to breathe fully. For the first time in months, he felt the weight lift slightly. He realized he had survived, not because he was strong, not because he was obedient, not because he was lucky. He had survived because he refused to let the world take his humanity entirely. The moral victory. Karl Weiss walked away from the ruins. He would never wear the uniform again. He would never fire on innocents. His name would not appear in records of heroics or villainy. He would exist quietly, a witness to horrors, a survivor with conscience intact. And that was enough. The war outside would continue, but inside, Karl had won the battle that mattered most. He remained himself. The last image. As he disappeared into the forest, the sun rose fully, illuminating the smoke and ash. Birds began to return. Life quietly crept back. Karl Weiss, young soldier turned survivor, walked alone. A man who had seen the depths of cruelty, but chosen to preserve the spark of humanity inside him. He would live, and he would remember.